Now my great pleasure to introduce you to Victoria Pruden. Victoria has worked in Indigenous and women-centered focused human services work since 1998, having worked for Métis Nation, British Columbia for 7 years, a woman-serving nonprofit organization for 15 years, and as an independent facilitator and contractor, providing healing programming and workshops both on and off reserve with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit participants. Her passion for trauma-informed practice, lateral kindness, healing work, and elevating the voices of Métis and other Indigenous women has been the focus of her career and community-based activities for many years. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you so much for providing an introduction. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're joining us from another time zone, which is way east of where I am right now. As our kind helper has mentioned, my English name is Victoria Pruden, and my first Cree name is Kasipkokapuat Peasuskotusqueo. So I got that name in ceremony when I was in my 20s, and loosely translated, she is the blue lightning coming out of the Thunderbird's eyes. And I received my second naming in ceremony when I was 40. Kakisopwiniotnisqueo, so Chinook Wind woman. I must have become more mild and soft as I've gotten older, and I think that's probably a reflection of that sort of warmed naming for my second name. It's such a pleasure to be able to join you today to talk about cultivating lateral kindness in our lives, in our communities, in our workplaces, and beyond. I did a lot of praying and preparation for today's workshop. I had a nice smudge here, did some reflection. I should mention as well, I'm calling in from my home in Saanich, BC, which is located on unceded and unsurrendered Lekwungen territory. And I acknowledge as well the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations and Wasanich First Nations that I'm closest to here. And I'm very happy that we can spend some time together today. This presentation is going to blend a bit of a PowerPoint presentation, but then we're going to hit pause and we're going to have an experiential component of today, which I think is one of the most powerful components. So I began doing this work in community because I was alarmed at the impacts that lateral violence can have in the work that we do in our communities, in our families, in our extended families. And it's very much rooted in a desire to nurture lateral kindness, to nurture self-kindness and compassion, and be able to tap into our empathy and being strength-based, especially when we're challenged. Those of you who work in community, we know that there's some roots related to colonialism and oppression that can make us more vulnerable to either being laterally violent or experiencing lateral violence. It's present in the world that we live in. It's especially present for our youth, and it's seeking out other ways through technology that can, make us more vulnerable. So I'm just going to dive a little into the presentation here. So as mentioned in the introduction, I'm a seventh generation Métis woman, an Abduosan woman, Michif woman. This is a photograph of my family. My dad is on his grandmother's lap, and I want to acknowledge her. Her name is Sarah Jane Delorme, and she was a Muskigisqueo in our family and in our communities. So she did a lot of work with medicines, and I really like to just touch in and touch base and acknowledge, the strong matriarchs that I come from. And I think that they're still very present with me now and help me to feel strong and help me to carry on and always remember them in the work that I do. I also just want to acknowledge, I've got a pair of moccasins up as my back screen, and these are beautiful moccasins made by my partner's mother, Therese Willia Arden, from Tlicho territory, Betchiko, in the Northwest Territories. And I was happy to be able to wear these moccasins when I traveled supporting elders to go to Rome last year, when elders and residential school survivors had a chance to address the Pope and other members of the Catholic Church. So I just want to acknowledge her beautiful artistry. And that's another piece that strengthens me in the work that I do. So when we think about lateral kindness, it often brings to mind for me the need to reflect about the traditional values that we come from. You know, regardless of our ethnicity, our culture, we all have traditional values that can help to guide us and root us in how we walk in the world. And as I was reflecting for today, these are some of the things that came most to my mind. That in the midst of challenges, stressors, it can be really hard to keep our hearts open, keep our kindness flowing, and keep our self-care strong so that we can move and work in strength-based ways and laterally kind ways. I personally believe that lateral violence at its root is very anti-life. It can have an energy that's not unlike colonialism and oppression at its worst. It can kill potential in people, creativity, make us disconnected from acceptance, undermines energy and our feelings of connection. In the challenging lives that we have right now, we're just fresh out of a pandemic. We're all facing financial pressures and other stressors. Lateral violence can make us more vulnerable than we already are. So, you know, I think it's an important recognition to realize that we can be vulnerable to lateral violence. We can be vulnerable to acting in laterally violent ways. And how can we prepare ourselves and how we walk on a daily basis to turn more towards kindness and the impacts that that can have. Today, it's my hope that you'll take something valuable out of what we discuss and that the kindness exchange that we're going to do today with each other will help to fill up your spirit. So I have a little bit of a teaching that was shared with me and with members of my community by Maria Campbell, who's one of our treasured authors and elders and knowledge keepers in the Aptigo-San Michif community. So it goes like this. Long ago, the elders used to tell us to have mercy and compassion for one another, gentle kindness. Long ago, the elders used to tell us to love one another, to get along, and to strengthen one another by working together.
Victoria, what's the best way to ask questions as we go along from the chat?
Oh, okay. Well,
Would you like, I could put my hand up, or I've got a question on some examples of lateral violence.
oh, I'm gonna just say, just hold on. We're gonna get there. It's part of the presentation. So, what I'll say is we're gonna get there in about 5 to 10 minutes. How does that sound?
And maybe what I'll do is when you want to have questions, I'll just let me know and then I can read off what I've seen.
Yeah, people feel free. You can feel free to put your Zoom hand up as well. So if you just if I click on my button here, I'm just trying to figure out where the hand up function is, but maybe I'll leave that to my co-pilot here if you want to explain that in a bit. Okay. So I'm just going to go through a couple of things here. Today, as we approach the work, I want to talk a little bit about being grounded and being strength-based. So when we're living in a strength-based way, we're trying to look through a lens that really focuses on our resilience, the ways that we're positively contributing in life, in family, in work, reminding ourselves to be grounded in our strengths and our skills, reminding ourselves about the good things that we have to offer in the world and those that others have to offer. When we're really grounded in a strength-based lens, we're going to hold in balance, acknowledging our challenges while acknowledging our resilience and our strength, the positive characteristics that have helped us to overcome to keep going, to thrive through adversity. And we're going to strive to choose our language, our responses, and our approaches that look at resilience, strength, and what is possible. Not always easy, and none of us are perfect, but trying to ground ourselves in that strength-based way of being is a really good approach. Now, I had the great privilege of working for many years in a trauma-informed agency. And I think it's really important to have some even just basic awareness about being trauma-informed and how we work and we walk and we live. So I believe that being trauma-informed in our way of being supports a movement of lateral kindness. And it can be an antidote to lateral violence, whether we're experiencing it, whether we're triggered. Being trauma-informed helps us to encourage accessing our compassion, our empathy, and our kindness in the ways that we are being with each other. Some of this information in the presentation might bring up some triggers for folks. And so I really want to ensure that you have a few ideas that are easily accessible to help you if you're starting to feel triggered. And, these are probably more of like a Western way of being. Sometimes if I'm feeling triggered, I need to turn to my medicines, I need to smudge, I need to do other traditional activities that can help get my nervous system regulated. And these are just some gentle practices that we can be aware of for today. So being present in the moment, touching something, feeling something. Sometimes people use little grounding tools like holding rocks, or you may have a ring or a bracelet, something that you can feel that's tactile, something that you can see, something that you can hold. Another good way to help your body to get your nervous system back online and deal with any sort of triggers that you might be experiencing is to move your body. So you could get up, get moving a little bit, gently shake yourself, try to release some tension. A walk outside, maybe after this workshop, would be something that can help you get centered, get you grounded, and bring your senses back into the here and now. An easy technique for nervous system regulation and dealing with triggers is to practice our breathing. Something that all of us can do. So reminding yourself to be conscious of your breath, taking even 4 slow, deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth can help to get your nervous system online, help you feel more grounded, calm, and manage triggers as they happen. The other 2 pieces here are gently reminding yourself that you're safe in this moment. If you feel unsafe or there were a real threat to your safety, of course, we want to encourage you to try to find a safe place as quickly as possible. But just if it's a trigger that you're dealing with, sending yourself that strong message that you are safe in this moment and that everything is okay. And last thing, taking a look around, using your senses. What can you see? What can you hear? What can you smell? What can you taste? What can you touch? So our 5 senses are a really good way to get us back grounded. So I want to talk a little bit about one of the traditional values that we have as Michif people and Aptugosan people. And I think that I believe that this is a universal value for certainly many Indigenous people. And that's the traditional value, the traditional law that we have of Wokotowin. And so Wokotowin means that we recognize that we are all connected. We are an extended family. We're connected to each other as human beings, as kin, as extended family. We're also connected to the earth, to the land, to the waters, to the air, to the animals, to the plants, and to the spirit world. So when we're living and we're walking in Wokotowin, we're embracing all of that we truly are interconnected. And this goes so beautifully with the ideas and the practices of lateral kindness, that we want to nurture Wokotowin and our connection with each other by supporting each other in authentic ways, by trying to see the good in the situation, by how we manage conflicts or disagreements, and that we want to try to walk in healthy ways when we encounter those challenges. So as I mentioned before, today we're going to be grounding ourselves in compassion, empathy, care, love, and kindness, especially in challenging situations. Being laterally kind helps us to act in ways that are for the good of ourselves and for the greater good of everyone that we're connected to. By putting ourselves in a frame of awareness about lateral kindness, it really can help us to manage those situations that may be laterally violent that we encounter. It may help us to recognize and bring to our awareness when we might be at risk of behaving in laterally violent ways that don't serve ourselves or others. And by stepping into lateral kindness, we can help to move away from adversarial or competitive ways of being and step it more into traditional values that consider the success and the well-being of everyone. So I'm really wanting to sort of jump in to address the question about lateral violence, but I'm just going to pace myself a little bit here before we talk about that. So lateral kindness is a way of being that we're hearing more about as the years go by, which I think is extremely positive. There's many people doing good work that inspires communities and workplaces and individuals and families to be laterally kind. And so stepping into this movement, making a commitment to displaying and embodying lateral kindness really can be transformative. Stepping into that strength-based perspective, making a commitment to be assertive, to be kind, to be open, to be authentic is really important. And it's something within our reach. It's something that we all can do to take a positive action. Lateral kindness really invites us to try new approaches and strategies in particularly those difficult relationships. So moving towards assertiveness, resolving issues, seeing all sides of a situation and focusing on what's good can help us if we're having to move through conflict. Some of the ways that we can easily practice lateral kindness can be by giving praise, by recognizing the good that we observe in the people around us, really making that commitment to lift each other up through genuine care and through celebrating what we see in others. Lateral kindness can be truly empowering, involving giving power back to people, creating an environment where positive and kind interactions can provide motivation, can open up safe space, and returning to true authentic kindness, mutual caring, gentleness. Those can be ways of supporting ourselves and supporting those around us. So I'm going to just rather than pause for discussion right at this moment, I'm going to move into addressing the question that was asked about looking at possible behaviors of lateral violence. And so many of you may be familiar with the work of Jane Middleton Mawes. She had done a lot of work which inspired a lot of healing workshops, activities, and transformational experiences for Indigenous communities and Indigenous people. And so Jane Middleton Mawes describes lateral violence as when a powerful oppressor has directed oppression against a group for a period of time, members of the oppressed group feel powerless to fight back, and they eventually turn their anger against each other. I'd spoken about getting that teaching from Maria Campbell. And she wrote a beautiful article in 2007 that I still love to refer to about the need for Wokotowin and for returning to those traditional values that reflect our deep connection to one another. And this is a quote about her observations about lateral violence in community. "The lovelessness that abounds in Aboriginal life is painful. It just bloody hurts. We need to start being kind to one another, start treating each other like relatives, and practicing the principles of Wokotowin. And that's free." It is. So making those commitments towards that laterally kind maintenance of self and clarification of your intentions And then taking those steps to practice kindness with others is something that we can do every day and continue to work on as we try to strive to walk in laterally kind ways. So, sorry, go ahead. Okay. So I have just a little bit of an overview here. When we're thinking about what lateral violence presents as in a workplace, it could be something like this. It could be harassment, unwanted behavior that may range from unpleasant remarks to physical violence, sexual harassment, racial harassment, or discrimination. Those are more legally defined behaviors that we could see presenting themselves in workplaces or other forms of organizations. Some of the more subtle displays of lateral violence could be these interpersonal behaviors: silencing, dismissing, disrespecting, discouraging, or denying others. And probably all of us have had an experience at one time or another as children, as youth, as adults, where we've either had these experiences or perhaps even displayed these types of behaviors in our interactions with others. So it's really good for us to be able to reflect about our own experiences and also raise our level of self-awareness about how we might be behaving or participating or upholding or allowing laterally violent behaviors to take place. So I'm going to just hit pause here for a second. And I'm just wondering, at this point, does anyone have any comments or any questions that we want to talk about? If you want to raise your Zoom hand or let myself or our helper know, I know that someone had a question, so just want to make sure we're making space.
No. Thanks, Rusty.
Okay. I'm just going to unmute myself. Thank you so much for taking care of the background noise there. I think someone just inadvertently had their mic on. Okay, so if no one wants to talk or share at this moment, I'm just going to pop back into our presentation. Okay, so I just wanted to sort of conclude that sort of categorizing part of being aware of lateral violence here. So we know as Indigenous people, we carry with us impacts of trauma, ongoing impacts of intergenerational trauma, colonial violence, ongoing experiences that can cause us a great amount of stress, impact wellness. And when we're experiencing those things, it might be really hard for us to access empathy and compassion for ourselves and empathy and compassion for others. So just upping the levels of awareness that we have about those continuing impacts of trauma and really centering ourselves in a goal to become laterally kind, strength-based, and trauma-informed, I think is incredibly important. I want to talk for a little bit about where a person might be if they're acting out in laterally violent ways. If a person is triggered, if they're acting out in laterally violent ways, it could be someone that we know, it could be someone that we work with, it could be someone in our family, it could even be ourselves. I just, I'm going to try to get us to access a little bit of empathy and understanding here. It doesn't mean that we don't have boundaries, but there's probably something at the root of what that person may be experiencing and how they're living in the world that could be going on that makes them perhaps defaulting to laterally violent ways of being in the world. So I want to talk about just a little bit about impacts of lateral violence. Because laterally violent behaviors are a form of abuse, they can have serious impacts on people who may be experiencing them on an ongoing basis. So they can have physical impacts, they can have psychological impacts, they can activate headaches, sleep disorders, other physical conditions. It may impact the person's confidence, their sense of self-esteem, feelings of sadness, feeling unworthy or incapable. And it may undermine their sense of productivity in a workplace or an organization. So I'd just like you to reflect for a moment about how you might support someone if they were being impacted by lateral violence. So if you can just hold that for a moment and think about how you would reach out or how you could reach out to someone who's being impacted by lateral violence. Okay, and there's a question here from Brenda. What's the difference between lateral violence and violence in general? Well, I think one of I'll attempt to answer that in the best way that I can. In my experience, when we're talking about lateral violence, we're talking often about people in families, organizations, or workplaces or groups that are kind of all at the all in a cause or an activity or an action or a community together. So we're not necessarily talking about, a stranger on stranger or people who may be experiencing victims of crime. We talk about issues of, domestic and relationship violence and other forms of violence, probably in more distinct ways. I think when we're talking about lateral violence, like what we're talking about today, we're talking about some of those really unhealthy and undermining behaviors that can take place that may not necessarily be overt physical violence that could be taking place towards someone. Perhaps we're talking more often about the subtle interpersonal behaviors that can undermine people emotionally, spiritually, and in other ways. So there's a long-winded attempt at an answer about lateral violence, but usually we're thinking about it as, when people are being oppressed and experiencing a lot of pressure and a lot of, it could be, collective experiences of trauma and colonial violence. Let's look at that as an example. Then there can be a tendency for us to lash out at one another in communities or workplaces. I'm noticing another comment in the chat. Social media can really play a part in lateral violence. Yes, absolutely. And, we look at some of the prominent cases that have come into the media, where especially youth can be very impacted by online harassment, bullying, and it can drive people to self-harm and suicide. The ultimate in life-ending pressure. So I know that we're really acutely aware of the vulnerabilities that youth or anyone of any age can have. Seems as though social media and other platforms can offer an outlet for people not to have to really be accountable. And there's lots of vulnerability there. So it's something that we really need to continue to try to be aware of and try to take care of those folks that may be experiencing that. It can be so undermining for people's mental health, their spirit. So thank you for your comment. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And thanks for just sharing those realizations and reflections. Really appreciate you.